Okay.
Oh,
oh,
okay, Lauren. Yeah.
okay. Welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee. As before, this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Due to the current situation, all members of the Corporate Governance Committee and officers presenting today are joining online. Can I please ask that all officers and members mute their microphone until they wish or are invited to speak? And if you're able to use your video camera, to please turn that on for the duration of the meeting. If members or officers wish to speak, please ensure you now use the raise hand function and not the chat facility. Before we begin, I will now ask members to introduce themselves. I understand there are no substitutes today. So I'll begin with Mr. Barclay.
Good morning. I'm Tom Barclay. I'm County Councillor for Syston Ridgeway.
Thank you. Mr. Bolter. Oh, you're on mute, Mr. Bolter.
Joe Bolter, County Councillor for South Wixton.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman. Oh, sorry, Mr. Kaufman, you're still on mute there.
Right. Jeffrey Kaufman, one of the county councillors for Oadby.
Thank you. Mr. Orson.
Yeah, Joe Orson, county councillor for the Mountain Wolds division.
Thank you. Mr. Old.
Ivan Old, county councillor, Market Bosworth division.
Thank you. Mr. Poland.
There we go. James Poland, county councillor for Syston Foss division.
Thank you. Mr. Richardson. Oh, me. Are you able to rejoin, Mr. Richardson? Are you able to cancel and rejoin? I think we'll ask Mr. Richardson to rejoin.
Yeah.
Mr. Sheehan.
Sean Sheehan, County Councillor for Forest and Measham division.
And Mrs. Wright. Can't hear you, Mrs. Wright. I think your microphone's on mute.
Hello, Amanda Wright, County Councillor for Burbage.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have Mr. Richardson there.
Sorry, just wouldn't unmute it.
Okay.
Councillor Terry Richardson for Narborough and North Wexton.
Great, thank you. Thank you, members. Now we move to the first item on the agenda, which is the appointment of the chairman. To note that Mr. Tom Barclay was nominated chairman-elect to the Corporate Governance Committee at the annual meeting of the County Council held on the 8th of July 2020. Could I please call on someone to propose that the chairman be appointed?
I propose Councillor Terry Richardson.
And somebody to second, please.
I'll second.
Oh. Thank you, Mr. Orson. Okay, in that case, I shall now hand over to Mr. Barclay as chairman for item 2.
Okay, so this is the election of the vice chair, and I would nominate Terry Richardson. If I could have a seconder.
Second.
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, and everybody's in favour of that. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of June 2020. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of June are taken as read. confirmed and signed. Is everybody in agreement?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. No queries on that. So question time, the item 4 on the agenda is question time. I have received no questions from members of the public. Item 5 is questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I have received no questions from members. Item 6, to advise any items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent. Elsewhere on the agenda, there are no items. Now, have any members got any declaration of interest on any agenda items this morning?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Which
Paper 8 and paper 9. I have a personal interest in terms of the position that I held up until just over 2 weeks ago, and the fact that there's reference in here to the independent child sexual abuse inquiry, which I've been told I may need to attend. I'm also, in terms of unaccompanied asylum seeking children, still the chair of the Regional Migration Board. I've been advised that that's personal interest, and if that's recorded, I'm quite happy with that.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Ivan. Thank you. So we've noted those. So before we move on to consider the substantive items on the agenda.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, you've got some.
Yeah, can I just clarify on the LGA code of conduct? I have responded to that as an individual councillor in my capacity as a borough councillor. Do I have to declare that?
Well, there's no harm in it. I've done exactly the same, James. So if you record it as a personal interest, that's fine. I don't think, I mean, there has been a sort of all-party call go out to people to respond to it. So, yeah, I just for the absolute certainty, yeah, that's fine. So before there's no
Chairman,
one else who, yes.
I've got my hand up, I should have.
All right. Sorry, I can see it, Terry.
Address my usual one for item 12 as a Lloyds Bank pensioner.
Okay, thank you. So that's all the items now. So we're going to. So before we move on to consider the substantive items on the agenda, as a reminder, can I please ask members to allow officers to present their full report before seeking to ask questions? As we're all joining online, to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to speak, I propose finish presenting the item. I will then open up for questions. To indicate that you have a question, please use the hand raise option and I'll call upon you one at a time. Now, if everybody's got the hand raise option, once this presentation, which is on the first agenda item, the risk management update, and this is on cyber risks, which we have Jane Glasgow going to present. So we'll go through that and then we're going to ask Neil to cover the rest, but you will have an opportunity to ask questions once Jane Glasgow has done a presentation. So Jane, could I ask you to carry on with your presentation? We can thankfully see the slides on the screen. So please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Barclay. So hello, everybody. I'm Jane Glasgow. I'm the Chief Digital and Information Officer. I've also got with me today Michael Coles, who's our Technical Security Officer as well, in case of any questions as we go through. Lauren, could I get control of the slide deck, please?
Yes, no problem. Yeah, go ahead.
Great. So the purpose of this is to go through the cybersecurity risk that's on the corporate risk register. Sorry, Lauren, it's not giving me control. If you could go to the next slide for me, please. There we go. So this is the risk that's on the register. As you're all aware, cybersecurity has increasingly become a major risk for organizations of all types, and it's absolutely critical that we manage our exposure to cyber security risk and mitigate against any cyber attacks. So could we go to the next slide, please, Lauren? So context. Just want to give a definition for what this means and what it means from a local authority perspective as well. So cybersecurity is far more than just the virus protection that you see on your laptop or your phone. It includes all of our hardware, software, network infrastructure. It covers the data that we have. As I'm sure all of you are aware, we have some very significantly sensitive data that does need to be kept secure, and it also protects us from unauthorized access, harm, or misuse, whether intentional or accidental. Now, cyber incidents can be very disruptive, and we have seen some local authorities have been victims. Most recently, Cleveland and Redcar has made the news when they had a ransomware attack, and it's had several weeks of disruption. We've seen a number of local authorities and universities and so forth that have been impacted by this. One of the key points I will make is that this is going to be an ongoing threat. This threat will not go away. So this risk will continue to be kept on the register going forward, and we will continue to consistently monitor, assess, and mitigate the risks as they evolve and as they change. Go to the next slide, please. Over the last few months, obviously COVID-19 has been the primary focus for all of us. Cyber criminals and cyber gangs have taken the opportunity to use this as a lure by playing on people's fears and desire for information. So we've seen a number of phishing emails using the COVID-19 title, and then trying to distribute malware and ransomware. And it's not just us, everybody is seeing this attack, although fundamentally the types of attacks that we're seeing aren't different to the attacks that we were seeing before. It's simply playing on that COVID-19 fear and desire for information. We're also seeing attacks against newly deployed remote working technologies, and I'll come and talk about that in more detail in another slide. And they've also been preemptively registering new domain names with a view of trying to make their phishing sites and so forth look convincing and valid and as an authoritative source for that information. We could go to the next slide, please. So in response to COVID-19 and cybersecurity, we had to rapidly deploy and expand our home working technology and infrastructure over a very short period of time. However, we already had that technology in place, so we do have a proven technology infrastructure in place that has been successful in the past. So what we've simply done is build on that existing infrastructure, improving how we're continuing to roll out security patches, bolstering the security that sits on that. So the risk that some organizations have had where they've had to roll out new tech, unproven tech, or tech they're not familiar with, hasn't been a risk that we've faced because we've been building on existing and known technology platforms. We've also improved our cyber incident process and incident response plans. They were designed for a working assumption, of course, that we were all in the office. Nowadays, our teams are far more distributed, so they've been updated. And we are using information from our active threat monitoring network. So we participate and share information with other councils through the WARP. We're talking, of course, regularly to the NCSC as well as other networks to ensure that we're on top of any threats that are out there, and we're learning lessons from other experts and other people in the sector. We're also monitoring for non-approved technologies. A lot of organizations have rolled out, new video conferencing technologies and so forth very, very quickly. We've made sure that anything that's coming onto the network is approved, reviewed, and goes through an appropriate risk assessment. And on top of that, skills of our officers and members is critically important. So we've improved staff communication. We've also improved training and a number of other things to ensure that people are aware the risks and the challenges that they face and how they need to deal with those. On top of that, we've got a significant body of work on that has improved the resilience of the general network and infrastructure. And whilst I won't go into the specific details of that, there is an ongoing program of work that ensures that we are rapidly responding to the threats as they come up and as we're made aware from the NCSC and the various warps. If you go to the next slide, please. So just a quick overview of how we manage cyber risks. We have a technical security officer, who is Michael Coles, who is on the call, and his job is to identify those threats and risks, obviously manage the register, but more importantly, to implement and manage the ongoing activities related to countering any threats that we see and making sure that anything we do in relation to new system deployments, changes, upgrades, etc., are done in a way that keeps us as secure as possible. We've also integrated cybersecurity into the overall risk management process, and we're ensuring that there is a communication chain that goes all the way up through to yourselves with quarterly updates to the corporate resources, DMTs, as well as 6 monthly updates to the corporate management team as well. On top of that, we have internal forums for cybersecurity policy, risk strategy, and best practice that's integrated with information governance, our road mapping and architecture processes, etc. We have regular system health checks from an external body, and we've had multiple different organizations over the last couple of years reviewing our infrastructure and how we're doing things to make sure that we're on top of the things that we need to be on top of. And then finally in that, obviously it's important that there are checks and balances. So we have regular audits through the internal audit function to ensure that we are managing those risks appropriately. And of course, they're drawing on the experience of the sector as well to make sure that we are doing the things that we need to do to be effective in our mitigations. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I won't go through this slide in detail, but this is the risk process overview. And this just shows the process that we go through, who's communicated to, escalation paths and so forth for the various risks that we have on the various registers, and our mitigating actions and where they're being checked. So final slide, please, Lauren. So any questions?
Thank you, Jane. That's a fairly reassuring and comprehensive presentation, which instills quite a lot of confidence. I don't want to tempt Providence, but it certainly looks as though we have systems in place to pick up and combat risks by the various means through the National Communications link and also through other councils working together. I wonder whether any members have any questions. We have Michael Coles, a technical officer here as well, who can answer questions, as I certainly can't. Is there anybody who has any questions they'd like to ask? I don't see any hands up.
I think Mr. Poland and Mr. Bolter have questions, Chair.
All right. So, oh, that's strange. I can't see the hands. So, Mr. Bolter. Mr. Bolter, if you can unmute yourself and we'll have your question, please.
Yes. Have we had any cyber attacks at all at the County Council?
Yes, is the simple answer. One of the realities of cybersecurity is that most organizations have an ongoing number of threats and attacks or attempted attacks continuously. So we have had phishing attempts. There have been, and I don't want to go into the details in an open forum, forgive me, but we have experienced them. And to date, we have successfully managed to stop them from causing any issues for us.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks for that question. So, Mr. Poland.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the presentation, Jane. In terms of, again, apologies if this is something you can't answer in sort of open forum, but in terms of if we were subject to the same malware attacks that were going around last year, you referred to for Redcar and many other organisations, do we have systems to back up on a regular basis what we have? So obviously I'm aware that those systems sort of take over the network and potentially leave organizations open to massive risk of data loss. Do we have systems in place to sort of limit very much what the damage would be in the event that they were successful in getting into our systems? And do we have sort of roadblocks in place from an individual point of view, so that in the event, I don't know, a member, for instance, accidentally allowed one of these malwares in, that would stop at a point before it would take over and affect the whole network?
The simple answer is yes. We have a data backup strategy. That data backup strategy is constantly being evolved and changed in response to the threat. I would say that no system is perfect. The very nature of cybersecurity is that the cyber criminals are constantly evolving and changing, and we're obviously working to stay ahead of that. But yes, we have a data recovery and a data backup strategy. On top of that, we have various layers of antivirus, firewalls, and you know, a number of different interventions at different points on the network that would hopefully stop this. And we use also the NCSC active cyber defense tools from local and central government as well. So there are a number of things in place. None of these systems are perfect, as you've seen from Cleveland and Redcar, but we are actively managing and mitigating and adapting as we go.
Okay, so thank you for that, Jane. I mean, a really silly question, but I take it that none of our officers are using their personal equipment with home working, that they're only using Leicestershire County Council equipment, or if they are using their own, how do we mitigate the risk?
So we have multiple access points for people to work, as you know, either a laptop or VDI. Yeah. Those are only allowed onto the network in an approved manner. So there isn't any mechanism to get onto the network without using one of those approved mechanisms. Each one of those is, again, risk assessed and constantly evolving and changing to meet the needs. But you know, there's, forgive me, I'd be happy to go into more detail in a different forum. But they have a significant number of steps in place to ensure that they're robust.
Thank you, Jane. That's fine. That sort of answers my question completely. So, so is there any other member who would like to ask a question? I can't see any more hands up. So I'll take it there aren't. We're now moving on to the main report, which is set out on pages 9 to 52 of the agenda pack. I'm going to ask Neil Jones, the head of Internal Audit and Assurance Service, to present. So over to you, Neil, please.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. So this paper is Agenda Item 8, the Risk Management Update, and it's the paper which starts on page 9 of your pack. And an overview is it provides information on a further update on the effect of the coronavirus on the existing corporate risks. Brief explanation of the role of the Local Resilience Forum in coronavirus risk management. A brief update on recovery planning and its risk management impact. The Internal Audit Service's planned counter-fraud work over the summer, and a brief update on the work of the Property and Occupant Risk Management Group, and again planned work over the summer. Just before I start into the detail of the report, Appendix 3 again just re-emphasises the constitutional responsibility of this committee to oversee the adequacy of the Council's risk management framework, including any alternative or short-term arrangements. So whilst departments are now picking up their risk management routines, there still hasn't been a full review of the corporate risk scores. It hasn't yet been undertaken. But nevertheless, updates on how those risks have been impacted by COVID-19 are contained in Appendix 1 to the report, which starts on page 15 and through to page 25. But paragraph 6 of the main report explains that following a brief discussion at the June committee, a further meeting of the local resilience forum's role in coronavirus risk management would be sought from the council's resilience and business continuity manager. So I did that, and what's in the report at paragraphs 6 explain the answers that I got there. So the virus emerged effectively after the annual updates to the National Resilience Risk Assessment process. However, the resilience manager gave me assurances that, by explaining that the overarching influenza type disease does already align with a well-established national risk of emerging infectious diseases. It was also included in the Resilient Forum's COVID-19 strategic risk overview, which addressed the capabilities required around future risks of this nature. The County Council is a Category 1 responder, and that means that it equally owns all of the risks within the Resilience Forum's Community Risk Register, and they're due to be reviewed and updated in September. And whilst such a pandemic requires a multi-agency approach, coordinated to the Resilience Forum, the Council plays a full role in responding to the crisis. Finally, the Resilience Manager outlined 3 plans that had recently been exercised. Paragraphs 7 to 9 of the report provide a brief update on recovery planning and how recovery risks will be aligned and escalated where required up to this committee. As an update to members, following the council meeting on the last week, the first iteration of interim departmental recovery plans will be considered at the cross-party working group on 28th of July, which is next Tuesday. Continuing on at paragraph 10 through to 14 is an explanation of how my internal audit team continues to undertake assignments into whether assurance can be given that the risk of fraud has been mitigated, and the service continues to provide others with advice received from national agencies and act as a sounding board. However, similar to Jane earlier, acknowledging its advice to keep ahead of the game, the service is planning a campaign over the summer and autumn to refresh fraud risk assessments, introduce national anti-fraud toolkits and challenge responses to fraud arrangements. We'll also provide further communication and arrange some targeted training. The next iteration of the National Fraud Initiative, which is a data set matching exercise, is scheduled in the autumn, which we take part in. And then finally for this paper, paragraphs 15 to 18 update members on the work of the Property and Occupant Risk Management Group, which I chair. Members are reminded of the group's emergence and original purpose, and I explain that the scope of the work and the representation has widened. And it now includes alignment to the workplace and the workforce recovery groups. Finally, paragraph 17 just outlines that some key actions and improvements have taken place, but the time is now right to review the group's terms of reference and the work plans, and I intend to conduct that over the summer and the autumn. That's all I have to say on the paper. I'd gladly take any questions.
Thank you, Neil. I mean, that's a very comprehensive cover off of where we're going with that. Really, the recovery planning and also the recommendations and the other items that you covered in the corporate risk register. Is there any questions from members that they'd like to ask? No, there's Mr.
Richardson and Mr. Bolter, yeah.
Mr. Bolter, please, if you and Mr. Richardson I can see as well. So, Mr. Bolter, if you'd like to unmute.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Neil, for your presentation. I was pleased to see the item on page 10, item 6 included. I was a bit concerned, so thank you for doing that, and thank you for your report. And I've got no further questions for you this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bolter. So, Terry Richardson, can I ask you to ask your question?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question for Neil, really, on page 15 under the COVID-19. I'm totally happy with everything there. I just wonder, is that At this strange time, democracy not only has to be done, but be seen to be done. But there's nothing on there about ensuring that there's a robust system for running council meetings. Now, I know that I have had significant problems with, as you've seen just earlier today, and several other members have. So are we doing anything to look at the robustness of what is supplied to members so that they can fulfil their democratic duty in public as we are this morning?
I can see Lauren's on the call. Do you want to take that, Lauren? Has you guys anything different that we're doing in terms of the...
And this is not about the meeting structure, it's about the equipment for the meetings, if that makes sense.
Oh, sorry. I don't have it. Yeah.
I'll just jump in on the, I can comment on the regs that they require that members are able to see and hear. If there is any indication from members that that isn't happening consistently, at least, I understand from time to time there may be minor technical problems that we're able to resolve, such as you had this morning of signing out and signing back in. If there are in a consistent way problems with that, then we do need to know about it, because that would mean the regulations aren't being fulfilled. My understanding is that meetings have been working quite well remotely, but we do rely on members to let us know if that isn't the case, because the regulations do have a requirement that there is an ability to see and hear. Where possible, at least. They are qualified to some extent.
Yeah, if I may come back, Chairman, thank you for that, Lauren. And I think it was just solely on the equipment, it wasn't on the regulations. I don't think I've been on a meeting yet when I've not had problems, as was seen at the council meeting with trying to unmute. My taskbar seldom comes up, and other members have got the same. I have been to IT team who are now building a replica of our Surface Pros to see if they can identify the problems, but I do think it's an issue that perhaps should be on the risk register and should be made sure it's looked into across the board, just as a thought. But thank you for the comments.
Okay, so there are no other questions as far as I can see. Oh yes, sorry, Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, just thank you, Chairman. Picking up on that point from Terry there, the entry in the report talks about recovery to a new normal level of services. I just wondered what thought's been given to the way we conduct meetings in the future, and whether we are seeing a new normal emerging now with remote meetings, or whether some kind of hybrid system will operate, or whether we'll go back to having meetings around a table. There's a number of ways we could go on this. I'm just wondering if there's been any thinking on that, and whether we as members need to give that some direction. That may be happening through the other group, the recovery group, or whatever it's called.
Yes, I think. Sorry. Just to mention, I think after the last council meeting, Mr. Rushton indicated that he was going to talk to the group leaders about the remote meeting mechanisms that we had used for the council meeting. The other thing to say on that is that the regulations that permit the remote meeting arrangements are only in force at the moment until May 2021. They came in very quickly, as you know, when this crisis first started, and one presumes that people thought that would be a good end date, and we'd be through this by then and revert to the normal sort of face-to-face meetings. We just simply don't know whether that's likely or not, I suppose, at this stage. So it's technically possible up until May that we carry on having remote meetings, but then if it's to continue beyond that, the government would have to extend the regulations or do something more permanent. So I think we should regard ourselves at the moment as in an interim position so far as the remote meeting arrangements are concerned.
Chair, can I just chip in from an officer's perspective?
Please do.
The default position for officers is that meetings will be remote or virtual, and only by exception and approved exception would there ever be a meeting within a room. And just as an update on that, I was talking to colleagues across the country yesterday, and colleagues in Shropshire have been told they will not return to work, and part of the reason is they're selling off Shire Hall, so they've got nowhere to go anyway. So I think there's obviously Lauren's got regulations to back up members' meetings, but in terms of officers, the default is virtual and remote meetings.
Thank you, Neil. I think both members and officers' safety is paramount, and we're in a rapidly changing situation, and goodness knows where we'll be by next May. It would have been unforeseeable at Christmas that we'd end up where we are now, but nevertheless we are where we are, and we've got to deal with it. And in the main, it seems to be working. I mean, thank goodness this didn't happen 5 years ago, because we wouldn't have been able to do anything. But I think I know members have had difficulties with IT, but in the main, we seem to be doing well, and our IT people seem to have certainly offered me assistance if I've been in difficulty, and with great difficulty, they've got me to use the system. So, I take the points, and the valid points, and thanks for raising them. So we've had a fairly good discussion on the local resilient forums, the reform, the recovery planning, the counter fraud, the property and occupancy risk management. Are there any other questions that members would like to ask? I can't see any more hands up, so there are no other hands up. So,
Chair, before we move forward, we normally at this point in time discuss which risk you'd like to be presented on at the November committee. And in our discussion briefing this morning, we thought the timing was perhaps right to bring the Brexit situation to the committee. And if there's any sort of change along the next few months on that, as a backup, we'd have a presentation on climate change.
I mean, I definitely think that seems very sensible to me. The no deal scenario and what impact it'll have on us is it's been overshadowed really by COVID-19, but it's still there. And what risk do you think it is a subject of debate, but we need to prepare for it. And I think if members are happy with that, we will take those presentation on the no deal Brexit and climate change. Has anybody got any comments they want to add? Can I take it that you're happy to do that? Yeah. Okay, so moving to the recommendations, the committee's asked to note the impacts arising from COVID-19 on the current register, the current status of strategic risk facing the County Council, make recommendations on any areas which might benefit from further examination, which we've just talked about, which is the Brexit no deal and climate change, and note the brief updates regarding the local resilient forum's role in the coronavirus risk management, recovery planning, counter fraud and property and occupancy risk management group. So are members happy to accept those recommendations? If there's any dissent, please indicate. So I take that as agreed. I can't see anybody dissenting on that. So we're now moving on to the draft annual governance statement 2019-20 as set out on pages 53 to 78 of the agenda pack. I'm going to ask Neil Jones to present the item. So Neil, over to you.
Thanks again, Chair. So this paper explains the approach to producing the draft annual governance statement for 2019-20, and it's for comment by the committee before it's signed off by the Chief Executive and Leader of the Council. So starting on page 53 of your pack under the background section, I've outlined at paragraph 2 that it's a statutory requirement to conduct an annual review of the systems of internal control and produce an annual governance statement. At paragraph 3, though, I've then explained that the regulations had to be amended due to the envisaged disruption caused by the coronavirus. And whilst the amendments didn't materially affect the requirements, they do allow for a slight delay to the publication of both the governance statement and the annual accounts. So officers compile the governance statement in accordance with a well-established national framework, which ensures that statutory requirements are met. This necessitates ensuring that the statement not only reflects the Council's own governance arrangement, but also significant partner or group entities. Once the draft is prepared, then a senior management group, which is described on paragraph 8, reviews its content, and then it's reported to this committee for its views. Paragraphs 9 to 16 outline the approach taken to compiling the statement. This requires a range of self-assessments to ensure conformance against the Council's local code of governance and the national framework, and reviews of other sources of evidence. This allows for the recognition of areas where developments may be required. Paragraph 16 of the report is important because it's unique in that it refers to section 7 of the governance statement, which starts on page 69. That section, as I say, is unique, and it outlines the Council's response to the coronavirus. So whilst there was relative stability in most of 2019, the last 6 to 8 weeks and thereafter impacted the Council and its services. SIP, for the accounting body which provides guidance along with the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives, advises that the governance statement should remain current up to the time of publication. So it allows for any further significant developments, hopefully not, to be added before the final publication with the accounts. The annual statement allows for reporting significant governance issues, and paragraph 17 lists the council's definitions, and paragraph 18 explains that the senior management group collectively determined that there were 2 significant issues in this year's statement, one being the impact on the NTFS, and second, the SEND complaints leading to referrals to the Ombudsman. These are explained in more detail in the statement on section 8, starting on page 71. Finally, the annual governance statement captures a range of future challenges and areas for further development, and progress against those will be continued to be monitored by the Internal Audit Service. That's the end of the overview on the governance statement itself. So again, I'll be willing to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Neil. Are there any members' questions on this? If you can, if you'd like to ask a question, just put your hand up. I can see Ivan Old. I would like to ask a question. Ivan, can I ask you to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you very much, Chair. In paragraph 17, there is reference to the outcomes for the County Council on this, and one of them is reputational risk. And further in the report, in I think it's page 72, there's reference to the ICSA. However, I'm a little bit surprised that the fact that the local Safeguarding Children's Board has changed and become a partnership arrangement with the Clinical Commissioning Group and also the police. It is a new entity, and if it were not to work, there could be increased costs financially to the County Council. There would be clear reputational damage to the County Council if there were any incidents. I have sent an email into the Chief Executive about this, but as yet I haven't had a reply. I'd be interested to know what the views of the rest of the committee would be on that.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, from a personal point of view, you've been vast amount of experience in this area, Ivan. And I think it's a very valid point. And if it does it is not an easy area to deal with. There is significant challenges, and I would concur with what you're questioning. And I wonder whether any other member has any comments to make in respect of that. I can't see anybody else making any comments. Perhaps Neil, what would your comments on this be? What would you say?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Mr. Oldham,
which is linking up with the police.
Yeah, we discussed this briefly at the member training the other day, didn't you? So, if I got this right, it's the Leicestershire and Rutland Safeguarding Children Partnership that you were referring to, Mr. Old.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, yes. Okay. So I have checked back. I thought it may have been. I offered on the day of the training. I thought it may have been recorded in the statements, or the self-assessment statements that directors have come out. We've not identified that, but I can give you assurance. I know it's on the the Children's Services Departmental Risk Register. It's currently being shown as an amber risk in that, but we flagged it with the Children's Department today, actually, to review that risk in terms of your comments. So it's coming at it from a slightly different angle, but I can try to provide some assurances that it's being monitored and will now be reviewed.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So I can't see anybody else has got any questions.
Sorry,
so
Chair, Mr. Richardson and Mr. Sheehan.
All right. That's
possibly at the top. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. So, Mr. Richardson, could I ask you to ask your question, please?
Just very quickly, Chairman, the point I raised at the pre-meeting, just so it's on the record, relating effectively to page 64, where we talk about the impact of winter on the health service. I've just asked if that could be considered further. I think this council does a great job for its staff, and more so at this particular time, in that it's always been, I think, commendable the way we've arranged flu vaccine jabs for all the staff. I just wanted it raised, not because I don't think the council will continue to do the proper thing, but I just wonder if we need to think earlier about how it will physically be done this time, because it will be probably difficult, if not impossible, for a lot of the staff who have the injection to get into the building to have it. So I would just ask that you could go to the appropriate group to consider how that campaign might be tackled, because I think, it's clear from what the government was saying yesterday that the more people that have vaccines for flu, the easier it is for them to recognise anyone who's got COVID. And I also think we have that duty of care to our staff, and I would add in counsellors as well. So really, it's not for a response. It's just to make sure it can be included somewhere for the appropriate group to consider how it may be done. It may not be possible, but I just hope it is.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. I think that's a very, very valid point. Given the circumstances we face, and it will avoid further problems for us if we do exactly as you suggest. I have Mr. Sheehan who wants to ask a question. So, Sean, if you could unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Yeah, it's just in response to Ivan. I suppose that when you get into any partnership situation where you've got more people around the table, there is a risk that you will lose focus in terms of what you're trying to achieve. But I think if the various partners agree their objectives and priorities and continuously review those, you perhaps avoid the risk of that happening. And I hope that's the way it goes. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So I cannot see any other questions. No, I can't see any more questions. So that's so everybody's got their hand down now. That's fine. So now we're going to move on to the recommendation, and the committee is requested to consider the draft annual government statement and appendix and indicate whether it is consistent with the committee's own perspective on internal controls within the authority. Note the two areas identified as significant government issues in the draft are in the report, and are the COVID-19 impact on the MTFS and the impact on the special educational needs and disability. And note that the annual government statement, which may be subject to such changes as are required by the Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting, has been prepared in accordance with this best practice. Is everybody happy? I mean, regarding the recommendations, all comments will be captured in the minutes as usual. Is everyone happy to accept those recommendations? Is there anybody in dissent? No, I'll take that. I'll take that as agreed then. The next item is the item 10, which is the annual report on the operation of the Members' Code of Conduct 2019-20. We've got Lauren Haslam, Director of Law and Governance, will present. Lauren, if I could ask you, please, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. It's a short report. When the Council adopted its current code in 2012, following the Localism Act, the Council determined through this committee that there would be an annual report back to this committee on the operation of the code, and that's the purpose of the report today. I've set out at paragraph 5 details then of the complaints that have been received over the last 2 years, but the purpose of the report today is really to focus on 1920. And members will see there have been 6 complaints in total over that period, 3 of which were withdrawn, 1 of which was resolved informally, and 2 of which are at a very early stage and ongoing. I can say there is no trend or pattern in relation to the complaints that have been received, nor any individual member in particular in relation to which the complaints are made. And then just really a note on the independent persons. As you know, the code and the legislation requires independent persons are appointed to the process, both to assist the member who's subject to the complaint, but also to assist me in my role as monitoring officer as a sounding board and a point of reference in how to approach complaint management. Members of the independent persons were appointed for 4 years and are due to be reappointed by the council. It's a council appointment, and that will be made in September following an ongoing recruitment process taking place over the summer. And I think members of this committee are involved in the selection process for the independent persons, which is clearly a helpful to us as officers in making the appointments. So for today, members, you're simply asked to note the report, and I'm clearly happy to take any questions that members may have on the report.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lauren. It is a fairly straightforward report. I don't think it throws up too many questions, but are there any questions that members would like to ask? No, I didn't. I can't see any questions there. Just having a scan through. No, I can't see that anybody has any questions. So members are asked to note the report. Can I take the report as notice? As noted. So I think we're all agreed on that. So I'll take that as agreed. So the next item is the Local Government Association Model Code of Conduct. I set out on pages 83 to 112. Again, I'm going to ask Lauren Hasland, Director of Law and Governance, to present the item. So over to you, please, Lauren.
Thank you again, Chair. So this report is to present to members the draft Model Code of Conduct prepared by the Local Government Association and subject to consultation, which closes in mid-August, 17th of August, I believe. The paper today is to enable us to prepare a response on behalf of the County Council to the consultation for submission back to the LGA. As has been alluded to earlier in the meeting, there is an opportunity for members to respond individually in their own right or collectively as a political group. And the paper was submitted to the group leaders and group whips a couple of weeks ago to ensure, taking into account holiday time and so on, that there's insufficient time for members to participate through their political groups if they wish to do so. But for today, the focus for me is on the County Council's response as a corporate body to the consultation. The report touches on the fact that back in 2019, the Committee on Standards in Public Life issued a report, and they made a number of recommendations, and this committee helpfully considered that report when it was published. We noted at the time the sort of commentary that the committee made, and officers, colleagues in Democratic Services have helpfully put together a response which is presented to you today based partly on the feedback to the Committee on Standards in Public Life report, but partly on our own thinking. And I would emphasise it's just officers' thoughts, really. And what we're trying to capture now is the member input into that to enable the response to go back. Let me think what else. Yes, as I said, it's suggestions only. The draft response that has been presented to you, and what my plan is to take on board any comments today that are made on the consultation to finalise and refine then the response in consultation with the chairman of the committee, in readiness to submit back to the LGA in by mid August being the deadline. I wonder whether, Chairman, whether it would be helpful then just to turn to the response to the consultation that's been drafted, and perhaps just to work through that and take any comments that members may have as we go through. Okay, so the first question on the code is around the scope of the code. And you'll see that if it's changed as outlined in the model code, it would require a change in legislation. And what we've done is just commented on how that really relates to our current code. I think from my perspective, when we were drafting this, we were rather neutral on this. And I think this is one of the areas where I think it's really a matter for members and for the political groups to reach a view. I had put down pretty much that we were taking a neutral approach. It does go much further, I think, than the current code, and I think catches a broader range of behaviour, would be within the scope of the code. So that's my simple observation on the scope. I don't know if members have any comments they'd like to make at this stage on that one, which we can note and take into account in formulating the response.
I have two hands up, whether directly related to that point, I'm not quite sure. Perhaps Mr. Kaufman, would you like to make comment on that point?
No, Chair, it's something aside from that. So can you just remember my hand's gone up and call me later on?
Of course I will. Of course I will. I can see your hand there. So if I could ask Lauren, if you carry on with your presentation, perhaps if members can note any comments they have to make. So at the end of the presentation, we can then take them as a sort of block lot. But I have at the moment.
Yes, happy to do that. Question 2 and 3 are really just about making things as clear as possible. So we're suggesting that members are clear and officers are clear as well, whether something's recommended as guidance or whether it's mandatory. So that's the purpose of question 2. Question 3, we're neutral on how the code is phrased, the terminology, whether it's described in passive terms or active terms. Question 4 is a little bit more meaty. This is about the 12 specific recommendations in the model code. And we're asked to confirm or say whether we agree or not with those. As officers, we thought they looked sensible, so we put, we agree to a great extent, but obviously we're open to changing that if members are not quite so positive. We've then gone on at question 5 to highlight some areas which are included in our current code and which would not be included by the draft code as worded. So I've just highlighted those at question 5, where, as I say, our current code is a little broader. Question 6, again, we're neutral on, no preference. Question 7 is about one of the parts of the code referring to civility. We thought it was relatively clear and supported the principles of it. At 7A, question 7A, we've added some commentary simply to recognise the fact that inter-member debate can be perhaps a little robust sometimes, and that there must be an understanding that there's a threshold beyond which it becomes unacceptable, but that we wouldn't want to have anything in the code that might be seen to stifle really a robust political debate as part of the democratic process. Question 8 we thought was reasonable as drafted, but we thought it would be helpful to give some examples and to clarify what is meant by disrepute, so that it's clear for people who are trying to work with the code and follow it what it's driving at there. So we thought that could be just expanded on a little. Question 9 we thought was sensible around bullying and harassment. Nothing really to add to that. Question 9A is a sort of qualification of the section on bullying and harassment, that we thought it would be useful to refer to the reference to equality generally rather than just the Equality Act, trying to just broaden that out a little bit. Question 10 around social media. I've said don't know because I haven't got a view on that, and I'm open to hearing what members' views are on that as to whether there should be something separate around social media, whether it should just be encapsulated as part of the code as it is at the moment in this draft, or something other. So I've left that open because certainly from my point of view and in discussions with colleagues in democratic services, we didn't particularly have any thoughts on that. We thought if there is to be anything on social media at question 10b, it's important that it's clear so everyone understands when it applies and what what the principles that we're working to are. Question 11 we supported because it represents no real change for the County Council. We currently take into account the declarations of interest that are referred to there in relation to close family members and associates, partner and so on. Then question 12, I think, was one that troubled us a little bit around the definitions here. And this is around declaring an interest. In particular, it refers to, it's a little clumsy the way this is worded because you have to read 3 things alongside each other to get to it. But it's the point around dual-hatted members. The way this is drafted, you have to make a declaration if you are a member of a body or in a position of general control or management, and to which you are appointed or nominated by the council. We thought it was slightly ambiguous whether the reference to "and to which you're appointed or nominated by the council" applied to both parts of that table 2. If either ways, if you're appointed by the or nominated by the council, and it's caught in that way, then it would be difficult for dual-hatted members because it would almost preclude participation in two councils, which I don't think could be intended. If it is just that it applies when nominated or appointed by the council, it's obviously less of an issue for dual-hatted members. But again, we would expect, I think, that membership of another council would be declared as a personal interest as it is at the moment, but not necessarily precluding members from participation in the debate. So I think we thought there would be some benefit in clarifying exactly what is intended around that, so that dual-hatted members may continue to participate as they do at this council at present, with district council membership, and that is managed on a sort of item by item basis, and only becomes a problem in very particular defined limited circumstances. In other words, there is a presumption that dual-hatted membership doesn't preclude participation in either council. I think the wording of this draft is slightly problematic and needs to be tightened up to make that position clearer for everybody. I think the rest, I think, are just general observations on the code. We welcome having a model code. We think it would be helpful if all members at different authorities had a same code to work to. We've just made a point there about co-opted members and how they should be treated because they're not referred to, and think that's probably around all I want to say on it. But obviously happy to take questions, but more importantly, happy to take the feedback from the committee to incorporate into the final response on behalf of the council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lauren. A fairly comprehensive report there with recommendations on behalf of the council. Now, I have a number of people who want to make comment or ask a question. So if I could ask Mr. Kaufman first to unmute himself and ask his question or make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have no argument with any of the proposals there. My concern is that this doesn't seem to deal with, and nothing we can do with it today, with the sanctions against councillors who sort of refuse to cooperate with this. Not so much on the county council I come across, but I certainly come across it on the districts. I don't ever want to go back to the previous system where they created an industry out of these codes and enforcing them. But I think when the sanction to suspend a member was taken away, all was lost. And I've seen instances where councils are completely powerless to do anything. And I just wondered, are we being consulted on that at any time, or have I missed it somewhere?
No, you haven't missed it. It was referred to in the report that we looked at in probably January 2019 it came out, so it would have been the next committee after that in the spring of 2019. The Committee on Standards in Public Life did make some recommendations in relation to sanctions, but they do require legislation to be made, and at the moment there is no sign of any legislation on this coming through. So this is just a model code. It doesn't change the law. It's just something that's commended to councils to adopt. But there is no authority from anywhere at the moment to make any changes in relation to sanctions. That requires a change of legislation.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. I take your point, Mr. Kaufman. I think the vast majority of councillors behave in a reasonable manner, but unfortunately, every now and then, exceptionally, you get some appalling behaviour, which is the exception rather than the rule. So, could I ask Terry Richardson to ask his question, please? I wonder whether he can unmute himself. I'm not sure whether his machine is working.
No, I'm there.
Oh, you're all right. Thank you. Thanks.
It's working at the moment. Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points really on what Lauren says. Regarding 10A, my personal preference is not to have a separate code for social media. I mean, to me, it should all be treated the same. If you are communicating with somebody, whether face-to-face or on social media, to me, the same code should apply of civility and reasonableness. And I sometimes think if you go the route of a separate code, you're almost trying to give latitude, or people think they have latitude. But that's a personal view, which may not be shared by this committee. I'll take the point on 12A. I mean, I read the top of that block several times, and like you, my view is that the "and" supersedes everything else, and therefore it's only if you're appointed by this council, which doesn't appoint people to other councils. So I would have preferred our comments to be done on that basis. It says, we have read and understood this to mean, which therefore makes a nonsense of C within table 2, and done it on that basis, because C, therefore, if we read it as we believe it should be read, C, therefore, cannot form part of it, because that makes a nonsense. I think the difficulty does arise, and I think you're right. So, where this council does appoint people to other areas, and I'm thinking perhaps of, quite a few of our members on the fire authority, that may give them more concern, and I would have perhaps preferred to see that highlighted, because no county councillor who's been duly put onto a committee by this council should be restrained from doing the duty the council wants them to. So I would have set it out as, this is how we read it. Please tell us that's the case. If so, C is a nonsense. And then to have a paragraph on the committees and bodies that this council does appoint people onto, because that is a part of what this council should be doing. And how could you have a ridiculous stage where somebody couldn't report back to the full council because they were on another committee? And that would just be absurd. But that's my personal view. It's just perhaps a way of doing it, because I think it almost accepts that we've read this, that if you are a dual hatter, this impacts you, where I've read it completely the other way.
Thank you.
That's helpful, thank you, because I think I read it the other way when I started looking at it, but then I read it again and I read it the way that you're reading it. But I think that in itself is problematic. If myself and the Democratic Services Officer look at it and we think it means one thing, and then you think it means something else, that's not good enough, is it? I mean, it needs to be really, really, really clear to everyone. So I think that's a helpful comment we can feed back. Thank
you, Terry. Very valid point. Thanks very much. So my next person is James Poland. If I could ask you to ask your question, James.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a couple of questions bordering on comments, I suppose. First one on question 10, the social media. I do think it's important. Well, for me, it marries very much alongside the acting in capacity as a councillor clause that we have. I think it's important that we do ensure clearly that when members are online acting in a personal capacity, and when members are online acting as a councillor. So, for instance, on Facebook, I have an official councillor email that I put news and things on, and then I have a personal Facebook account, which is for me personally. And I think if we're not clear on the distinction between what a member does online professionally versus personally, we could leave members open to all manner of allegations. And linked to that, I think as well, I think it's important that we separate what's improper from the code point of view to what is unwise politically, if you see what I mean. So what I could see a situation if the code was too strict, with allegations going all over the place from people disagreeing politically on Twitter, for instance, and whilst a member might say something that someone else disagrees with politically, that shouldn't be confused with what's improper from a code point of view. And I think it's important to have that distinction. Having said that, and again, it's just for members' thoughts really about how you then distinguish that from if someone said something online that was racist or something, even in a personal capacity, you couldn't then, I guess, park the difference at that point. So it does merge together, but I think in general terms, it's important that there's a distinction made between the two, except maybe, as I say, in areas where it clearly goes beyond the pale as a behaviour. The second point I've got really is, this is a question, just question 1, acting as, identifying as, and or giving the impression that they are acting as a councillor. I understood that was the case already. Is that not the case already? Or that's my question.
Yeah, no. At the moment, it's the scope is acting in an official capacity is the present scope. So I think this is potentially broader, as you've been alluding to, and your earlier point about if a member's comment on social media or other platforms became offensive in terms of racist, then that would be caught anyway by the civility and equality part of the code. So I think there is a separation there. But I've made a note of the comments that you have made, so we can incorporate those hopefully into the response.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, James. About the good points. Now, if I could ask Ivan Knoll, please, to ask his question or make his comment, if he can mute himself. Thank you. Ivan, you're still muted. You're still muted. Oh, that's it. Oh, no, you've gone muted again. That's it. Leave it. Yeah. That's fine now. Yeah.
Couldn't quite understand why it muted me as soon as I changed it.
It's all down to me, Ivan.
I'm very happy with the response that's been put forward, but I don't think social media as an area is anywhere near adequate. I take James's point about the difference between being professional and personal, but from my work at County Hall prior to the annual meeting, one of the areas of concern has always been what is referred to as trolling, where young people at school particularly become abused. And I'd like to see the local government association taking issue on behalf of people to say that if we have to have a code of practice that we subscribe to, then it's incumbent on the social media companies to have a similar code of practice which would stop the trolling. Because many years ago, when we reorganised education in Melton, and I read issues that were or statements that were being made on social media, you could, with the best will in the world, attend a meeting, put forward a viewpoint, and then be called into account over so-called social media, with people able to make statements that were not accurate, were invalid, and actually made reference to you as a person. So happy with the response, but I don't think the section on social media is at all adequate. And I think James has touched on a really important point of the difference between the professional and the personal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ivan. I think they're unbelievably valid points, and I think the behaviour of people on social media needs controlling by the media companies, because people get extremely brave when they're in an anonymous capacity, which is appalling. It really is, and I take your point about trolling of children and stuff like that. My last question is Sean Sheehan. If I could ask you to unmute, Sean, and ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There's been a certain amount of discussion here about dual-hatted members, but to coin a phrase, what about two-headed members, those that are members of the executive on two different councils? Now, if somebody like Lauren, for example, I'm sorry to pick on you as an example, were to seek election to your local borough councillor, you'd probably be told that, no, you're far too important on the county council, you can't do that. And yet somebody that's got even more power, that's, say, leader of this council, is not prevented from being a member of an executive of another council. And I just wonder if there ought to be something in the code of conduct to say something about this. Because I think in terms of principles and legal way that a lawyer would look at it, there seems to be an inbuilt conflict of interest, and I'm not sure that's right. Well, in fact, I'm pretty sure it's not. But it happens. Anybody care to comment on that?
I wonder whether anybody does care to comment on that. Effectively, I think what you're saying, Sean, is one rule for members and one rule for officers. I am not aware that there's any preventing an officer standing as for election.
No, I'd be prohibited from doing so by politically restricted posts such as mine. Yeah, I'm not allowed to have a political, affiliation or to canvass on behalf of any political party, or certainly not stand for election. I think the point that you're getting at, Mr. Sheehan, is covered in our code to some extent, in that we have a presumption that dual-hatted members, including members of the executive, can sit on both councils, but that when there's an issue that is of such significance at one council that it ought to then preclude the member participating at the other council, that then the requirements to stand aside in effect by declaring the interest and not participating come into play. So that's how we tackle it at the moment. It's not really touched on this in this model code at all, and I think it probably ought perhaps to be covered, and it's picked up a little in that ambiguous part at the end of the code that we've looked at.
Yeah, and my contention is that the conflict of interest is inherent and impossible to avoid.
Thank you, Sean. Now, I have your points are noted, and I think Lauren will make a note of those. Joe Orson, I think you've got your hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, it's following on from Sean's and comments and Lauren's response. We obviously LCC can look at it from their side, but would this be better work with district colleagues because it has to be uniform from both angles, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think a uniform code of conduct across all councils would be beneficial. But I do take your point. Yeah, would you? How would you comment, Lauren, or would you comment on that?
Yes, well, what I did do at the beginning, when this code came out and we drafted this response, I sent it to the monitoring officers of our local district and borough councils, but making it clear, of course, that it was my thoughts only, or our officer thoughts only, hadn't been to members for consideration, because I wanted to flag the issue around dual-hatted members with the monitoring officers at the boroughs and districts, so they could take it into account when they do their own response to the consultation, because I'm sure they will wish to do so and to represent the members' interest at that level as well.
Okay, thank you. So, is there any other questions? No. The committee is asked to consider and provide feedback on the proposed response of the County Council to the LG consultation on the new model code of conduct. Agree that the monitoring officer produce a final response for submission to the LGA following consultation of the chairman of the committee as appropriate. With regard to the recommendation A, all comments now made will be captured. And is everyone happy with that? I'll take that as agreed. I'm also happy to move recommendation B. Can I have a second? Can I have a seconder? Somebody second that?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. I take that as agreed then, and there's no dissent. We're now going to move on to the quarterly Treasury Management report, and I'm going to ask Nick Walsh to present the report. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. And just apologies in advance if I drop out. I seem to be having some connectivity issues this morning. I've been thrown out of the meeting twice. So reports such as these are brought to the committee quarterly to update members on actions and events arising in the quarter. This report covers the first quarter of this financial year, which ended on the 30th of June 2020. The report is in the usual format and just starts with a definition of what Treasury Management actually is in paragraph 2. An appendix is attached to the report. This is an assessment by Link Asset Management, the Council's Treasury Management Advisor, on the wider economic background as they see it, taken from the quarterly updates they provide. The key points from their assessment are included in the report in paragraphs 5 to 8. A particular note is the fact that the V-shaped recovery that the markets had been hoping for now look less likely. A V-shaped recovery would essentially see the economy recover very quickly from the pandemic, the sharp decline in economic growth being followed very quickly by a sharp increase, taking GDP back to pre-pandemic levels. And despite the significant central bank and government support, the gradual easing of lockdown has only produced a modest recovery in activity, and there is an expectation that many businesses will fail and unemployment will increase. Nonetheless, it does seem likely that April will prove to be the low point for the economy, and it is now recovering just as not as quickly as it was originally hoped. It is also worth noting that CPI, the government's preferred measure of inflation, had fallen to 0.8% in April and has actually fallen further since, with the June figure being at 0.6%. The government, in conjunction with the Bank of England, tries to maintain CPI somewhere between the 1 to 3% range, and so it's now outside that tolerance. A response to this would often be to raise interest rates, but this is unlikely to happen until economic recovery is more sustained and market confidence begins to rise. So that's not expected to happen until next year at the earliest. And as a reminder, the Bank of England has held the base rate at 0.75% for over a year up until March 2020. Then in March, it was reduced to 0.1% as an early response to the managing the impact of the emerging pandemic. So moving on to actions taken this quarter, paragraphs 9 onwards in the report. Our investment portfolio has decreased from 204 million down to 194 million. But within that, 90 million of short-term loans matured and 80 million more of which have been reinvested. Of particular note is the fact that the average rate we were able to secure on our new loans at 0.56% is quite a bit lower than those that matured at 1%. And this is where obviously we're beginning to see the impact of that significant reduction in the Bank of England base rate earlier in the year. The chart in paragraph 11 shows how the average annual percentage rate, or APR, that has been achieved on our portfolio as compared to the Bank of England base rate over the last 2 years. Overall, the weighted annual percentage rate for the whole portfolio has fallen from 1.4% down to 0.82% this quarter. And we would expect this to decline further as maturing loans are reinvested over the next quarter. Paragraph 12 notes that because of the risks around COVID-19 and the unknown impact on services, including the potential to support providers and also mitigate against expected reductions in core income, a much higher than usual cash balance has been held. And obviously, when we refer to cash, this isn't bundles of £20 notes squirreled away in various hiding places around County Hall. It just refers to our current account balance within NatWest. Normally, this would be kept to the minimum required to cover daily commitments, with money being regularly moved in and out of money market funds to ensure liquidity was maintained. As mentioned in paragraph 13, the decision to recommence lending to money market funds in Q1 has been helpful. Without this, the APR on the portfolio would have fallen further in this last quarter. Money market fund investment recommenced due to increased confidence due to the central bank liquidity interventions, but also because of the expectation of there being withdrawals from funds. And also because the expectation of there being withdrawals from funds didn't actually manifest itself in the way that might have been expected. Moving on to the table under paragraph 15, this shows how the portfolio breaks down as at the end of June. And you will see that 2 6-month loans and 1 12-month loan are maturing within the next quarter. And these are likely to be reinvested into money market funds, as they may well pay a better rate of interest and are also more liquid than 6 to 12-month loans. And the cash balance obviously will also be reduced by increasing money market fund investment. In paragraph 16, this is just, we would always notify the committee of any loans that breached the counterparty list. There were none during this quarter. And then just finally, paragraph 17 estimates that only about 700,000 of interest is likely to be able to be secured this year compared to a budget of 2.8 million and a comparable figure of 2.5 million from last year. This is pretty much solely down to the fact that the Bank of England interest rate has been cut. The financial impact of this is part of the overall financial impact we have been reporting to MHCLG arising from COVID, which currently overall is estimated at around 30 million in total. So that was all I was going to say, Chair, on the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that comprehensive report. Certainly some very interesting points made there. Now, I have at the moment 2 questioners. Sean Sheehan, if you would like to ask your question, if you could unmute. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nick, for the report. Looking at that table on paragraph 15, all the resources are with banks and money markets. I don't know if I'm missing something, but I'm not seeing any local authority lending there. Is that the case, or is it just that it's not listed?
No, we aren't doing any local authority lending at the moment. You maybe recall that the last one we did was to Northamptonshire, and there was quite a lot of noise around that. And at the moment, we've taken the decision not to undertake any more of that at present.
It's very interesting because I sit on audit and governance at North West Leicestershire District Council, and they're heavily involved with lending to local authorities, and they've really cut down what they're lending to banks. So they must be taking a completely opposite view to the county in terms of risk. So I just find it fascinating, Chairman.
Thank you, Sean. It's almost, presumably we've used link asset management to advise us, and we certainly wouldn't want to be losing any money, but I very much take your point, Sean. I mean, the fact that we've reduced from 700, we're looking at 700,000 interest as opposed to 2.8 million last year and 2.5 million before, and we've got financial impact of 30 million, says it all, really. But interesting point. Could I ask Bill Bolter to unmute, please, and ask his question?
Thank you, Chair. I should be unmuted. Yes, I am. Yes, we've got this £35 million coming back in July. I did ask at the members' briefing on Tuesday, make sure it doesn't go into any long-term investment. But I also understand that the government is going to be asking for various loans to bolster the amount of money it's been borrowing. So are we going to look at what the government interest is going to be when they ask for us for money?
We'd certainly give it consideration, I guess. Obviously, just in relation to the money market funds, it talks about July. I mean, the reason it says July is basically because money market funds, generally speaking, we can they're sort of fully liquid, and we can take money in and out of those at any point we need to. But yes, I mean, obviously, if the government is looking to make fund or seek funding, then we will potentially make some of that available to them. But I think we just have to look at how that compares to other potential options at the time.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and thank you, Nick. I certainly think the government may well be looking for funding internationally as well as locally, but it's a very interesting scenario that we're in at the moment, and certainly a very changed landscape. Now, I have not got any other questions. I can't see anybody else wants to ask the question. So that is the end of the Treasury Management, and the committee is asked to note to the report. Can I take that as agreed that we are happy to note that report? Yeah, so we'll note that report. We now move on to item 13, which is the Internal Audit Service Progress Report, which is set out on pages 123 to 138. So if I could ask Neil Jones to present this item for us. Thank you.
Yes, thanks again, Chair. Whilst this is a routine report outlining work undertaken and progress with implementing our important recommendations, there's two short sections on SIPFA's work on standardising audit opinions and an update on proposals for planning for the remainder of the year. So in terms of routine reporting, Appendix 1, which pages 129 to 133, summarises for a 6-week period to the 10th of July the assurance and consulting work, investigations, assisting others, and training and development. It's obviously a very short period since the previous committee, so whilst a lot of work is in train, there's not a great deal to report on closures. The report explains in paragraphs 10 to 12 the continuing impact of the coronavirus on the service in terms of redeploying staff, providing reviews of service changes, and in my head of an internal audit role, and that of also being a service manager and including the insurance service. So this table shows that by 10th of July, we provided 258 days. That figure is understated, and I think it's nearer to 280 days, which is obviously an impact on resource. But at least with the return of staff who have been redeployed, we're in a stronger resource position now to go forward for the rest of the year. Appendix 2 in pages 135 to 182, 138, then outlines a position with progressing the implementation of high importance recommendations. So in summary, there were 3 audits that have contained new high importance recommendations. They were audits that concluded over the COVID period, really, so it's nothing to do with the COVID issue. So the 3 that had got new high importance recommendations, 5 where we've extended our implementation dates, that's to allow management time to plan their service recovery. But we haven't closed any off this period. Paragraphs 15 to 18 just bring members' attention to some proposed standardising of engagement opinions by SIP for the accounting body. So heads of internal audit such as myself are currently at liberty to implement their own opinions given at the end of each audit. The opinion is on how much assurance can be given that risks are being mitigated and that objectives will be achieved. Here at the County Council, we've traditionally used 4 opinions, they being full, substantial, partial and little. Very rarely do we get little, thank you very much. And it's just dependent on both the number of recommendations and the severity of the recommendations made. So SIPFA's standardised consistent proposals have been debated by national heads of service, and there are polar views on whether they will be accepted. We had a meeting yesterday and I'm beginning to review the feedback on those, and then I'll prepare a report for the Director of Corporate Resources, and through that come to this committee on the Council's preferences. And then finally, paragraph 19, I inform that meetings are continuing with directors about audit requirements for the rest of the year. I just wanted to give assurance to members that there's ongoing work on changes to service delivery and counter fraud. We're following a similar pattern to other county internal audit functions in devising short-term plans dealing with new risks as they're arising. At the meeting yesterday, some excellent ideas emerged from the heads of audit meeting, and I'll be feeding those into the process. So given it's just a short period, not a great deal to report, but that's all I have to say. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Neil. It's a fairly straightforward report. It shows the areas of high importance that are being examined. Have any members got any questions or comments regarding this report? No, it doesn't look as though anybody wants to make it. It's not that long since we had an update. So the report simply asks the committee notes that the contents of the routine update. Can I take it as noted? And there's no dissension there, so I'll take that as agreed. Now, the next item and final item is the National Audit Office Guide for Audit and Risk Committees on Financial Reporting and Management during COVID-19. Now, I'm going to ask Declan Geoghegan, Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, to present this item. Declan, thank you.
Chair. The report's really just an introduction to some guidance that the National Audit Office have released, which is sort of targeted at committees such as these, and it really is there to just kind of give you potential considerations as we go through the sort of the COVID crisis and out the other side. Just a sort of bit of a health warning with it. It is targeted across the whole of the public sector. Some of the terminology is a bit alien to sort of what we'd use locally. It talks about things like parliamentary authority and ministerial directions, but obviously there does tend to be kind of local equivalents. So you kind of just sort of retranslate it as you look through it. I mean, it does look at overall a helpful document. It kind of splits into 4 key sections. You've got to touches on what you should look for in the annual report, which is really focused on sort of the organisational performance side of things. You've got the financial reporting, which obviously kind of gets picked up primarily by the statement of accounts that the committee receives each year. Also touched on the control environment, which is obviously key at the moment, and kind of this is primarily the financial controls and system controls, which is just due to the nature of kind of the changes that were experienced due to the COVID crisis. And also the kind of strangely kind of titled kind of regularity of expenditure, which is basically, are we still spending money on what we should be sort of spending money on and doing it in the right way without a risk of fraud. So the intention, this is, like I say, this report's really just a sort of an introduction of the guide to the committee, so it gives you a bit of chance to consume it before we actually come back with the responses. So, and the aim is to come back in November at the next committee meeting, and then pick up responses to those questions on both the annual report and the financial report as we present the accounts to yourselves. And also internal audit have got sort of a series of work planned to pick up the other responses, which is kind of like the second half. In terms of those first ones, the financial accounts, when it can feel a little bit like marking your own homework, but we will have, there do tend to be similar lines of inquiries to what external audit look at, so they'll obviously be in attendance there as well. So pick up any sort of further kind of review type questions people may have. Happy to take any comments on it, really. Like I say, it's just an introduction, really.
Yeah, thank you very much, Declan. That's great. Now, it is really just covering the areas of our responsibilities as a committee: annual report, financial reporting, control environment, and regularity of expenditure, which we will look at, and it'll come back again in November with the annual report. Has any committee member got any comments or questions they'd like to ask? No, it doesn't look as though they have. And so the committee again is asked to note the guide and to provide any comments. I don't think there is an awful lot to say on it because it's fairly self-explanatory. Can I take the report as noted? Yeah, so I'll take that as agreed. Now, the next meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee is currently scheduled to take place on Friday, the 6th of November 2020 at 10 a.m. However, it is likely this will be rescheduled to a later date in November to tie in with the amended deadlines for the completion of the external audit of the financial statements, which have previously been reported to the committee. We have till the 30th of November to complete the external audit, and it will be completed well before the 30th of November. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn there. And then we will, once one has been completed, we'll arrange a date for the next corporate governance meeting. So that's where we are. They will be in touch for a suitable meeting. And the final thing, any other items which the chair has decided to take as urgent? There are no other items. So thank you all for your input this morning. And that concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much, members. And I'll see you at the next corporate governance meeting, if not before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Many thanks.
Thank you,
Good evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.